So as people are filtering in, I will get the boring stuff out of the way first, because you are not here to see me, you are here to see these wonderful authors. Thank you all for coming, first of all. I know in this very strange time, we are spending a lot of time on our computers for work or school. So to get back on them to do something social is much appreciated. This event is being hosted by Belmont Books. I'm a bookseller there at the bookstore. If you are unfamiliar, we are an independent bookstore in the greater Boston area, though we do ship throughout the US. If you would like to purchase any or all of these authors' books tonight, we have both Kathy and Alexi's books on our shelves now, and you can pre-order Lynne's book, which is coming out in November. We have a rather robust virtual event schedule, especially next week. We have 6 events happening next week, Tuesday through Friday, ranging from picture book events to YA, to a pride event, to poetry, to fiction. So there's something for everyone. Tomorrow especially, we're having our monthly bedtime stories. So if any of you have kiddos, we usually host a monthly bedtime story at 6:30 with 3 picture book authors, and they will read their books aloud to the attendees. It's very sweet and cozy, perfect for getting into your pajamas. If you haven't attended any of our events tonight or in the past, I will introduce the authors. I will turn it over to Lynne, who will conduct the discussion, and then at about 1:45, we will open it up for a Q&A. If you do have questions for any of them, there is a little function at the bottom of your screen. It looks like 2 chat bubbles. It's called Q&A. You can submit your questions there, which is very helpful because it kind of just pulls them out and makes them easier to read and notice, so it doesn't get missed during the chat. So feel free to submit them there, and then we'll get to them at 7:45. And I will introduce who we're all here to see. We'll start with Kathy first. Katherine A. Sherbrooke is the author of Fill the Sky, which was a finalist for the Mary Sarton Award for Contemporary Fiction and the Forward Indies Book of the Year, and won a 2017 Independent Press Award. She is chair of the Grub Street Creative Writing Center in Boston. We love Grub Street. We're so happy to have Grubbies here for events to celebrate their books, so this is wonderful. She lives south of the city with her husband, 2 sons, and a black lab. I always enjoy when authors include their pets in their bios. Our other author on panel tonight is Alexi Pappas, who's an award-winning writer, filmmaker, and Olympic athlete. She's been profiled in and written for the New York Times, Runner's World, Women's Running, and The Atlantic, among other publications. Pappas has co-written 2 movies thus far, a feature film and a documentary. A Greek American, Pappas holds the Greek national record in the 10,000 meters and competed for Greece in the 2016 Olympics. Our moderator tonight is Lynne Griffin, who is a nationally recognized counselor and novelist. Writing as Lynne Reeves, her new novel of domestic suspense will be published November 9th of this year. It's called The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. It's a twisty, effective read that combines a crime story with a devastating domestic drama about addiction and the blind spots we bring to our most precious relationships. Hank Philippi Ryan, who we have had several times for events and who's hosting a night of mystery and suspense on the 17th of June, has blurbed the book. And Hank has called it shatteringly original, intensely suspenseful, and written with a tender eloquence that will break your heart. I'm sure Lynne will be doing events later in the year, so keep an eye out for those. And then Lynne, over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, we've got all those lovely accolades, and what that equals, ladies, is a lot of hard work behind the scenes, right? So what's really going to be great tonight is that we're going to really dig into some of the themes in your books. Kathy's Leaving Coy's Hill and Alexi's Bravey, both books that you would think on their face are very different, right? We have a historical novel that really examines the life of activist and voting advocate Lucy Stone. And we have Alexi's memoir really highlighting so many amazing issues for women to think about. Things like family of origin and motivation and drive and finding your passion and being creative. And all of those sort of umbrella issues that we're going to be talking about tonight are found in both books, even though, again, on their face, they may seem wildly different. They're, fascinatingly similar in many, many ways. So I thought what I'd do is talk about some of those bigger issues tonight and then, have just an organic conversation about where these books take us, and then maybe a little bit more about our creative lives. So the first thing I wanted to say is that I noticed right off the bat, 3 big sort of umbrella topics that both books hit on. And that is women's equality and the fact that Lucy was paying attention to that. And we are still paying attention to that. And in different ways and in some ways that are quite similar. And then the second thing I noticed was that women are still very much defined by the roles that society puts them in. And that's the way we educate ourselves, the way we relate to our partners, the way we parent our children, and the careers we invest in. And then the last one is the idea that on a personal front, we really still have our own deep down desires, and society may or may not be acknowledging whether or not we have permission to engage in those. So I thought I would turn it over to Kathy first to tell us a little bit about Leaving Coy's Hill, a little bit about Lucy, and then how did Lucy pave the way for Alexi's story, which in many ways she did.
Right. So as Lynn said, Leaving Coy's Hill is historical fiction. It's inspired by the life of a real person, Lucy Stone, who was an abolitionist and a pioneering feminist. She was the first woman ever to speak out for women's rights. And this is the mid-1800s. So this is a time when for a woman to speak in public, it was considered literally scandalous. It was something that wasn't done. But Lucy believed very strongly in abolition and wanting to make the country better. And then transferred her oratorial skills. She was a master orator into speaking out for women's rights. But even though the book is steeped in history, it's told in the first person because I wanted to take a deeply personal look at what it felt like to be her, what it felt like to stand on a stage when angry men were literally throwing things at her, what it felt like when she faced some serious hardship, physical hardship, emotional hardship, crises of confidence. Even though she was this master orator, anytime she had more than 3 days off, she worried if she was going to lose her ability to hold the crowd. She had no role models, very few role models to look at before her. So I found her story really inspiring and wanted to tell it in a personal way. And as far as how she paved the road for all of us, but in particular, someone like Alexi, or I guess I just see a lot in common between you, I should say. You talk about in your book how athletics are, like so much of our society, they're set up for boys or for men. There are all these assumptions about training as an example. You use as a really good example of the male body, and no one thinks about the female body. And that's, and this is 2 centuries later, and we're still seeing these same kinds of issues. And so it continues to take people like you, Alexi, speaking out and saying, hey, let's pay attention. There's a different way to skin this cat. So that's something that really struck me in common between the 2 books.
Great. And so Alexi, tell us a little bit about your story and what how you characterize Bravey.
Bravey is a memoir in essays. So it has like an emotional arc rather than a narrative arc. And that's just the type of memoir I like to read, and the one that I felt I could write. And it's about, my journey with, I think early on, I lost my mom to suicide, and there was a lot of, it was just a very specific way to enter the world, and then kind of paving the path towards the things that I wanted, while I think having an ongoing relationship with her and with what I understood about her. And then it kind of coming full circle when I experienced, I think, some of what she must have felt in a post-Olympic depression that I had after the Olympics. And so the book is like, it's a lot about chasing dreams and like, creating your own life, but also, inevitably that mental health piece plays a big role. And I think that was the thing I felt I could communicate about in a way that would have helped me if I was someone who found this before I went through it. And so I think a lot of it is just having in mind that audience as someone who maybe, or someone who didn't have those resources and could learn the easier way by reading a book.
Right.
Oh,
yeah, I think the mental health piece. Yeah, I think the mental health piece came out really profoundly in that in Lucy's story, she definitely struggles with those down moments and with all of the expectations that are placed on her. And similarly, you come into the world knowing that there's something going on with your mom and not able to really articulate that at the young age that you were.
Right.
I also found it really interesting in your story that even as a young child, you knew that in that moment, your mother needed more attention than you did. And so even as a very little child, you took that in, and then later realized that that maybe wasn't the best role to play for you, right? Was to not say, I have needs, I want attention, and this is how I want to be cared for. I thought that was all really parallel.
Totally. And I actually wanted to ask Kathy, because when you were writing this, it's based in all these realities, but there's a certain vocabulary that you have as someone from today. And what I was wondering, I'm genuinely curious, like, how did you adapt your vocabulary to the height of the intelligence of your character? Like, how did you adapt that, or what did you do to do that, I guess?
Yeah, so a lot of reading from that era, including letters between Lucy and the most important people in her life, so I could understand their vocabulary and how they thought. And I also read some novels that were actually not about that time, but published during that time, which helped sort of put me in that era, and also newspapers, any kind of primary sources I could get my hands on that were from that era. But it is interesting in your mindset, like when you think about, Lucy definitely struggled with some mental health issues, but she didn't know to call it that.
That's right.
So, she talks about struggling with, dark moods and not being able to get a dark mood, which, you even talk about at some point, it's like, wait, is this just lazy and feeling down, or is this something bigger and larger? And how do we know that, and what do we do about it? So it was sort of fascinating to me, trying to get into her mindset of what little knowledge she had about mental health, and therefore that, just sort of putting it on her own shoulders to get out of it, which, you did also but oh God, there are people who can help.
Well, and it's so interesting because you get to decide what's important for you. Like, that's your artistic integrity of like, what is interesting to me about what she must have felt, because if she wrote this book, maybe she would have never thought that those feelings deserve like 5 pages, like they deserve half a page or something. And so that's what's fascinating to me about the form you have, is that you are making choices to like lean in on things like a filmmaker would, right? You're just looking at things from this modern eye with the contemporary vocabulary, but it is a modern eye in a way, because you're choosing what kind of bandwidth you give to everything.
Right. Yeah. No, that's definitely true. And it was about her emotional arc for me.
Yeah.
And so therefore, which scenes, basically, I mean, I think in that way, I think a little like a filmmaker, which scenes do service to the story to communicate what that arc is like.
I think the other thing that's very interesting about both books too, and this is really what we know about mental health, is that the way that you explored Lucy through her letters to her friends and the people she cared about was that she talked about her depressed mood without using those words as how it manifested in her body. And Alexi, you talked a lot about how post-Olympics, you were a little bit duped by the fact that maybe it was just that you were super tired after this big emotional and physical experience because you were feeling it in your body. And the truth is, we know now, the research tells us that depressed mood is felt in the body. And so here you have this big time gap between these two, explorations, one fictional, one memoir. And really, we're hearing the same thing, which is that it is a biochemical, neurologic connection that happens and it lands in our body and we try to talk ourselves out of it for whatever reason. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah. Yes. And that, I think that was like the big shift that maybe came between, the era that my mom lived in the 90s and today. So like maybe a lot of the progress, I think we obviously have a long way to go, but I do think there's been quite a bit of progress in the way we understand mental health from the 90s backwards to the 90s forwards. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's probably been quite a bit of progress from before then too, but I certainly think in researching the way that my mom, got treatment, which was, I think, supposed to be good, was very antiquated in the way of forcing feelings and just not understanding that it's not a choice. So I think that's your point, Lynn. And I don't know, I mean, it's hard to, what to say about it, that those were so similar, like it's interesting, what can we say? It's
well,
sad.
I think Lucy wrote to her friends to try to uncover it.
Yeah.
And you wrote a memoir.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, we've at least made a huge difference there, right? That Lucy could only reach out to her confidants, and maybe your mom didn't feel like she could reach out to anyone, but you felt like you could write a memoir. You could claim it. You could own it. And I think that's a huge difference right there.
Yeah. And I mean, some of what's interesting actually that I just thought of is like during, like when my mom was going through this was when I think some of the work that Lucy must have done was taking effect, where like she could be a working mother, for example. And so she was enjoying some of the privileges that maybe came from an era before her, but that also came with some guilt and feelings that she couldn't possibly have something wrong. And so I think there's a cyclical nature probably to these struggles where like we make progress and then there's some guilt about how you might feel during that transitionary period, or when, and so she was maybe enjoying some of the benefits of her, women before her, and then some of the challenges that of what the reality is to be like a full-time working mom or whatever, that my mom was kind of among some of the first pioneers of that. So that's interesting to me too.
Right.
I also think there's this, I was really moved by, there's a particular scene in your book, Alexi, because I think a lot about women as high performers and, are we allowed to fall apart? And so that scene when your friends take you wedding dress shopping, and on the one hand, it's the last thing that you want to do, but they sort of treat you with the dignity of saying, no, we're still going to treat you like our friend who needs to go wedding dress shopping. And Lucy has a scene too where her friend Nettie helps her out of her biggest crisis in very simple ways, like just assuming help her with her sermons, and she can help her cooking dinner. And the importance of, I mean, there's a huge message in your book about get the professional help you need, which is so important and clear, but then also about the support you find in small and big ways from the people in your life, which really struck me, that scene. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I love those stories. I love those like friendship stories because those come before the vocabulary, like, because obviously in your case, there wasn't the vocabulary at all yet. There was only the symptoms and the discomfort, and that's like an energy exchange probably between people where something isn't right with someone, but you want to love them somehow. And I think that's the kind of love that my friends were giving me, because that was before I really understood what was going on. I just was like out of my mind. I didn't understand. So I think you're right. And like maybe what's cool about that is also showing what friendship is, probably, you know, like independent of struggle. Like your friends are people who need to be able to handle you at your best and your worst. They need to be able to handle your good and your bad news. And I think that's like a very delicate thing, you know, friendship, and particularly those in those high stakes situations. And maybe just that like not everybody is equipped to help everybody at the same level. Like my friends were not going to be the ones that helped me get help. It wasn't going to like translate to me, but they could help in the ways they did. And I think that speaks to their intuition, maybe about just knowing where they can be effective and where they might not be.
Right. I think we need to talk more in our culture about the ways in which we help, as you're describing, right? Which is that not all of our friends can be the ones to make us see that we need treatment, or make us see that we need to do something differently in our lives, or that maybe we're choosing a not right partner, but they can be effective in other ways. And I think about the friendships I've had over the course of my life, and the ones that have really stood the test of time, in all seriousness, are the ones that were present even when they weren't skillful. So they were just gonna be there. Like, I don't know what to do for you right now, but I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. Because that makes you feel seen.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe, yeah. But you know, sometimes when you're that sick, you like would rather disappear. Like you don't want to be seen. So it takes an eye that's like there, but maybe not watching you or something. Like they're not judging. I think that was the word that Kathy used. There was just like a acceptance.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
You know, the other theme that I wanted to bring up was the one about drive. So I see so much in Lucy and so much in you, Alexi, about the idea of drive and the idea for having like a core passion. And Kathy, you and I talk about this as friends and writers, the idea that you have this core sense of a purpose. And I just thought it was really interesting how it was examined both in the past and in the present. So, you know, Kathy, why don't you talk a little bit about, either from your own perspective or from Lucy's, the idea of drive and what compels a woman to through thick and thin really keep going after the goal of equality. I mean, that's just a huge inner passion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I could definitely relate to, I'm sure I picked Lucy to write about because I could really relate to her. And I think it's this sense, it was this sense for her, you know, she was brought up under an abolitionist. So her father really talked a lot about, you know, not standing up for injustice. Ironically, he didn't think that women should have anything to do with that, but he at least sort of drove home with the family that things that are wrong need to be righted. And I think Lucy just, this is a nature nurture thing, you know, which is always a big question. Are we born with this? But I have a very strong sense that Lucy couldn't stand seeing a vacuum. You know, she saw the holes very clearly of what wasn't being done, what wasn't being said, what wasn't being fought for. And particularly in the women's rights, when she was speaking 7 days a week about abolition, and then had this light bulb go off that women were as enslaved in their own homes as many slaves on plantations, and she could no longer not talk about that. And even though people literally said to her, no, you know, you're here to work for the Anti-Slavery Society, not to talk about women's rights. We don't want you talking about that. She said, I can't not talk about it.
Right.
I think it's that feeling of, you know, and she quotes Susan B. Anthony at one point to say, it's not courage when you know it's right.
Right.
It's like the things you can't help yourself from doing because you just have to. And that's how she lived her life. She felt like she didn't have the right not to, actually.
Right. You know, I won't give any I won't do spoilers, right? But I will say one of the things that I love about your book is that you present in the very early stages the idea that maybe it's just this inner drive that she has and the example of her father. But then towards the middle to the end of the novel, we find out that she has a personal experience that has been a driving force.
Yeah.
And I feel like that parallels Alexi's story hugely, because I think your feeling of wanting to know your mother at every age, you're trying to know your mother, is, I just thought, such a really important part of your story too, and what drove you to learn more about what you wanted in life, right? Alongside learning your mother's story. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I think that was a very like kind and diplomatic way of putting it, because I think it was probably a little less healthy, my drive, in a way, simply because, you know, I just saw certain things, like certain, maybe, you know, I'm calling it like a bad pain experience with her, and the narrative that was told to me was she took her own life because she had to go and she was unhelpable, and those sorts of words. And so my drive really came from not wanting to end up like her. And so it was more like I had a really, you know, I imagine like playing wall ball, and I just had like a really, really firm wall to push up against. And I think what was unhealthy about it was we can't solve an internal problem with an external solution, but we can certainly try. And I think the Olympics and a lot of the high achieving that I've done has been in an effort to feel like I matter and that I'm happy and that I'm okay, up against, you know, the image of someone who I now understand a lot more, but I think at that time really felt like just someone to like push against and not be like. And you know, it sounds like that's common with high achievers, right? It's very common. It was a lot of people I met at the Olympics had trauma or just something they were pushing up against. And again, it's really, really potent. And then eventually we have to, I think, outgrow that and be able to like sustain independently of that. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think you're right.
You know,
yeah.
I think drive isn't always a healthy thing, right? Like some of the outcomes from drive can be healthy, but drive is almost a double-edged sword in a way. You may be accomplishing the things you want to accomplish, but to what end? I mean, I think we find in Lucy's story that I was enamored with the story of Alice, about her daughter and the impact of Lucy's drive on her child, right? Your mother's impact on you, and then, you know, and then Lucy's impact on her daughter, Alice. You know, again, I agree with you. I think drive is a mixed bag. It's complex.
Yeah. Well, I want, and too, like with Kathy, when you were, you know, deciding to write this, because what I'm wondering too is like, what drives you to like fictionalize, but really, you know, try to honor, like, have you always been fascinated by this genre, like this type of writing? Like what, because I've honestly never like, I haven't experienced tons of writing in this specific category, but my favorite book before reading yours was Joyce Carol's Wild Nights, which is similarly fictionalized, you know, it's a little fantastical, but fictionalized, you know, real events. And I love it. And I'm wondering, what do you love about it? Or is it like, why, you know?
Yeah. So I do read a lot of historical fiction, but I would say in general, whether it's historical or not, I say all the time that I feel like I've learned about the world through fiction, because you get to go to places, be in people's shoes, experience things that you might not otherwise experience. So there has to be a great story, a great character that draws us in, but I like coming away feeling like I've learned something without having to work too hard. If that, like, history always bored me. I can never remember dates and the places and all that stuff, but I can remember events that happen to people and that have emotional resonance. And on top of that, I think there are so many true stories that are incredibly inspiring. I mean, I think it's why memoir has gotten huge, because people love knowing that there's actual truth there, that you overcame what you've overcome, that you've accomplished what you've accomplished is fascinating to people. So being able to find a true story that not that many people know and tell it in a compelling way was really what I was after. And I had a moment of thinking, should I tell it as nonfiction? There's a lot of creative nonfiction out there that reads like a novel, but is, you know, very factual. But I wanted the license to get inside her skin, which is why I decided that it absolutely had to be fiction for me. But my hope is, I mean, in the end, Lucy's a real person. In the end, she's also a figment of my imagination. She's this character I created. So, you know, I would hope that someone who knew her and read this would recognize her on the page. That's what I was going for, but, you know.
You did it. You did it. I have a feeling that the care that you took to allow her to be human on the page was what really stood out. It really did. Really loved it.
Thank you.
I think another role that comes up in both books is marriage. And so I think the marriage of equals was a real theme in Lucy's story. They really bucked kind of some of the traditions of the day with her keeping her own name and her really reluctantly getting into marriage because she was weighing what she would lose.
Yeah.
And then Alexi, in your story, your marriage is a marriage of equals because you're business partners and you're creative partners. And what do you both think about that topic? Again, this many years apart and still women striving for that kind of relationship.
Yeah, I mean,
either one.
Go ahead, Alexi.
Go ahead, Kathy. You go.
Right. Well, it's right. Easier for me to talk about someone else's marriage than my own marriage, but no, it was totally revolutionary at the time, right? This notion that, at the time, literally a woman gets married and she loses all her rights and the man decides everything. The man holds all the purse strings, literally. And Harry made a different sort of promise to Lucy that they wouldn't live that way, but it's not easy. I mean, it's one thing to say that, and it's another to fully support each other's passions, to, so someone wants to go on a business trip or whatever it is. Okay, well then that puts burdens on somebody else. So they had a lot of struggles, and I was, fascinated how in your book, Alexi, you talk about how you and Jeremy sort of like all the work needs to get done somehow, the business work, the homework, the cooking, shopping, the whatever, and you guys just have to split it up in whatever way works. I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but a lot of people don't even, still to this day, don't even try to enter that kind of relationship. So
and I can, go ahead, Lynne. Tell us whatever you feel comfortable disclosing about how that works.
So I think, well, first of all, Jeremy and I met like pretty young, and I think neither of us, I was a sophomore in college, he was a senior, and I think neither of us were like looking to date, but we had to date. And I think that's like, that sometimes happens, hopefully all the time, where you're not like desperate, but you do what you've got to do. And then I think that we're both people who, I don't know if there's like two different kinds of people. Like if some people like work to play and some people like work is their passion. I don't know if like that is correct to say, but I can say that for Jeremy and myself, like having our work be we love working on our creative stuff. And so I think it was natural that it was the best way to spend time together, and it helped us have a common goal. And I've always loved teams because I think it's a special relationship when you have some goal with other people. Like it makes friends out of people who would never be friends on the sandbox if they have the same goal. And I think that's a really nice way to love someone too. But it is a constant, work, because, for example, the boundaries between the work and the romantic life, like that has, in the same way that mental health comes down on vocabulary and how we see it. I think with our relationship, we've had to have certain shifts in like work time. First it was like work time and relax time, but then what we learned is that relax could be done separately. And so there might not be time to be together, not working. And so we tried to call it connecting time, which meant like not working, being together. And so it's just been a constant work thing. But what I like is reading about Lucy, like, I mean, she didn't change her last name. You know, there are things that were really probably kind of wild for that time. And it sounds like someone who just like really knew that the best way for her to love somebody would be to like honor her own self and be her best self alongside somebody else who's their best self. And I love that urge has always existed, even if it hasn't always played out.
Right. Right.
And
that it's okay as a woman to say, I think there's more pressure. I don't know, I feel this as a woman to almost, it's harder to say, I love my work. Like, yeah, there's some days that if I could just work 18 hours a day for 3 weeks straight and do nothing else but do that and sleep, that'd be perfectly happy. Like, I feel guilty saying that out loud, right? Because I'm supposed to be doing all these other things, as you know, especially as a wife, as a mother of all, you know. And that Lucy was unapologetic about loving her work, and she was a career person first, and she was worried even about getting married because she's like, I don't have time for that, you know. I'm busy with this other stuff. And so I found that really, really fascinating, because I think women struggle more with guilt and all of that. And so so I just like the idea of you and Jeremy sharing so deeply parts of your career, being business partners at some level. It's just fun. Like, grass always looks greener, but we feel like you don't have to apologize to each other, right? About, you know, wanting the shoot to go in extra 4 hours because something really good is set.
No, we're definitely not apologizing about like being workaholics or whatever. I think more what it took was an overcoming of like ego at first, because it was unclear what the right thing to do was in terms of like you know, he moved to Oregon, for example, where I was training for the Olympics, and we made sure that we shot a movie there so that he would have business in Oregon. And so I think we've tried to make choices so that everybody feels like they're contributing and they have a purpose and they are part of the team, whatever we're doing in whatever place we're in. And I think what it takes is like just having moments in the incubator together before we go out and like pursue something and understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. Like, we are on the same page, and then enter the world. Because if we enter the world like a bunch of leaves, we're going to be blown by every wind. And, you know, we're more like we're the solid tree or the rock together before we enter things. And that's the best way, I think, to feel like you're just to be on a team is what people want to feel, I think.
Yeah. I think it's really important statement about marriage is the idea about being a team and goals, because I think sometimes what happens with pendulum swinging, right, is like in Lucy's case, she had to figure out a way to compromise too. She couldn't have it all about her.
Right.
She couldn't have it be all about him either, and vice versa. And I think what you're saying is that when you really see yourself a team as not two separate people who each want their own stuff, they each want their own goals, but that you're a team that has common goals and separate goals, you're in a much stronger place. And as somebody who's been married for a while, I can say that that's what we've learned, is that it's the idea that you really do have to find your personal compromises, because it can't really be about any one person, any one time, you know, or at least not for too long.
I think you're right. Do you guys have like lesson? I mean, this is going off the bookend, because they deep end and bookend. But do you guys, you know, Kathy and Lynne, have like lesson? I mean, I just want to like learn from you both too about like things you have learned as writers or as women. I don't know. I just want to hear from you about I want all the advice you have for me about life.
Kathy, we'll start with you. Lessons as a woman, lessons as a writer, if you can separate those two.
Just imagine I'm one of your like people, you know, I'm your.
You know, I don't. That's a really tough question. I mean, I think we have, one of the things we have in common, Alexi, I think, is the multiple career idea. Like, I loved how you said that, you know, being good at one thing and then trying to move into something else. So from running either to your filmmaking or writing, or you have more careers than I do, that one makes the other stronger. And so, I guess I would just say that, having been on the planet just a skosh longer than you, it's just keeping at it, which clearly you are unbelievably perseverant and resilient. You've got that in spades. But that's the thing that's just, I guess, my view on it is, like, if you feel strongly about it, you just keep plugging along.
Showing up.
Yeah. Exactly. There's no magic.
Yeah. I think that I have an adult daughter, and I often will tell her, even when it comes to me, I say to her, don't listen to anybody else's advice until you've sat with it yourself and decided for yourself.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, there's a Georgia O'Keeffe quote that's about that idea. What Georgia O'Keeffe used to do is, when she would finish a painting, she would look at her painting and she would decide for herself where the strengths were and where she thought the painting was weak. And then when she put it out in the world, if people commented on the strength and said it was a strength, she took it. And if they commented on a weakness and thought it was a weakness, she would say, you're right, because she had already decided for herself. Yeah. And I think as women and as writers and as artists, we have to decide for ourselves, and then taking the outside influences become easier to either accept or reject. And I think that's sort of, as women, what we need to do for ourselves.
Did you, one question I really want to ask you, Alexi, and it's relevant to this, is did you have doubts about that transition? I mean, obviously you do talk about how in running, right? I mean, there's a clock, there's a very clear validation. You've won, or you've beat your previous record, or and it sounds like you wanted to be an actress and be in films for a long time, but did you ever have that doubt of, like, okay, I'm an Olympian. I can definitely walk around with that tag on my jacket. There's no question about that. Can I wear this a director tag, actress tag?
Yeah.
A writer tag?
I think, well, this is a great follow-up to Lynne's point, because I think the first level of feedback that helps me is from other people, which is like, I don't think that that's that great, but it does mean a lot to me when people that I hear things from, whether it's like a running coach who's been to the Olympics says you could take this Olympic dream seriously, or a creative person I admire says you are a great actress or you are a great director. That does really matter to me, because I think I'm always the type of person who's looking for permission to believe in myself, which of course needs to come from within. And I think we all secretly believe in ourselves. But I think that sometimes the reason why we're on this planet together is to give each other confidence. And I think it's like an intangible gift we can give one another. And so for me, as an actor and a director, I never felt afraid of trying and doing it. And I was doing the improv theater at Dartmouth before, the running was really serious. It was more that I was hoping that someone would keep giving me that chance, whether it was through, these dialogues, or literally giving me opportunities. And I think the only way to do it, though, is to do it to a level where you might humiliate yourself, because you will never be the best actress or director or runner if you're not willing to poop your pants or look like a fool. You have to be able to go there. And so that I'm okay with. And so I think that the first step is I'm okay committing and trying my very best. I hope that it resonates with people. And then once I level up and am confident, I usually don't go backwards. But I do think that there's a muscle you grow called confidence in everything we do. And for me, it comes from a combination of looking at my work and saying it's good, and also feedback from people. It helps me. And it's happening in the creative world, which is really wonderful. And you know, with this book, I think it was slightly different than what people expected. I think people expected some like, you know, facsimile of the tweets and the Instagram posts that I write, which are just these short kind of poems. But the book is a little bit heavier than that. And I think I was ready to write that before the world was maybe ready. But what I was pleasantly surprised by was like the world was totally fine with it. And I think that's another thing, is that I think we often think like, this won't be welcome in this world. And it's like, yeah, give the world a shot, you know, maybe it will.
Right. I actually loved the story in your book about how when you did get that feedback of the review of your movie, and how it sort of deflated you, but then it sort of inflated you, and you were like, wait a minute, I have the ability to take this differently if I choose to, right? And I thought that was really important, because as artists, we're always getting people's opinions, and on social media, people are extremely free to say whatever they want, right? And so how do we steel ourselves from that, I think, is a really important question. How have you been able to do that?
Well, you read other people's books, like Amy Poehler's book, where she says when you get criticized, it means you're making it.
Right.
And so I think you just like keep finding reasons to stay on your own team. And I was very grateful for those words from her, because I knew she'd been through it. And I was like, all right, I'm just joining that club. And I feel like that's probably something that Lucy didn't have, because there weren't so many people like her. There weren't so many people before her, as you said, Kathy. And that's really remarkable, is when somebody does it despite, you know, not having like a satellite team by way of books or mentors or whatever it is that makes us feel like we're joining something. That's like a benefit we have now, that she probably didn't really have. And I wonder for her if it was like she was just so passionate that she didn't, or she's not driven by that same support. Like maybe she doesn't want a team or cheerleaders. She wants change, or, you know, some people thrive on conflict. So like, who knows? Maybe she was just like that fueled her or something, you know, something.
Well, I think it's why the when she had the falling out with Susan B. Anthony, it was devastating for her, because she did have that team for a while. And Susan B. Anthony,
true.
And they were very different people, but they loved a fierce debate, and they had the same goals for a long time. And so they bolstered each other. But then, you know, Susan B. Anthony clearly didn't want her to get married, that was just a nuisance for her. And then they have that big falling out. And so that was really devastating to Lucy. And I wanted to explore that sense of, you know, when she makes the decision that she does, that's going to create the rift, she knows it, and she has to make a choice. And Lucy, in my mind, as a character and a person, just always chooses the integrity of her values and her belief system at the expense of relationships, if that's what it
right.
And it costs her. And different people would make different choices, and those might be the right choices for them, and prioritize those relationships. And so that was something I really wanted to explore, because that was kind of it. That, and then she has her friend Nettie, a very close friend.
Yeah.
She has that team for a while.
You know, what's really interesting though, is that she does in her day, right, still seek feedback. She gets the feedback from her audiences. You wrote really, really well about how she was always gauging the things she was trying to say and what kind of response she was getting. Right. So even still, she's looking for that call and response, right?
Right.
And then she would have those dinners with all the people that were funding the work,
right?
And they'd be throwing feedback at her. So, you know, it's really interesting that even though there's this big time gap, her need to get the feedback was still present,
right?
Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. No, that's true. They just get it in very different ways.
Right.
It's often a lot slower, right? You wait for the letter for 3 weeks from a friend that says, I heard your speech was great. You know, today it's so much faster.
Yeah. Well, I think,
oh, that's funny. She didn't have Instagram.
Right.
Right, exactly. I think we're coming up on our time. We'd love some questions from the audience if you have them. I think maybe what we could do is just go around and do our what's next, because maybe there are some things you want to share with people. So maybe we'll start with you, Kathy. What's next for you? What you doing creatively?
Yes, so I'm deep into my next book. and it's very different. This book is not based on a real person, but also historical fiction, 2 timelines. One is 2 protagonists. One is a runway model in 1940s Hollywood, and the other is an aspiring Broadway star in the 70s. And the stories do interact with each other. And I'm excited about it. Well, it's always a little scary to talk about because it could change a lot between now and when it hopefully gets a cover. But that's where I'm at, and I'm excited to get back to that work.
Great, that sounds great. And how about you, Alexi? You've got a lot of irons in the fire here.
Yeah, well, that book sounds amazing, Kathy. I can't wait. Oh my gosh. And I love this. I seriously am fascinated by this whole historical fiction world. It's like an amazing thing. I just directed and starred in another movie, and so we're editing, and that's that. I'm developing another movie and a television show. So those are the creative worlds. And I'm writing something that down the line. And then running wise, I will be running a marathon this year. It is to be determined what and when, and all COVID dependent things. But I think it's been really healthy to have the creative stuff that we can do no matter what the world is. And I just sort of hope that the world is heading in the right place, and however I can fit in, that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I can't, you know, if they can't close down streets for a race, I understand that.
Oh. Well, maybe I'm sensing that you're gonna try your hand at some fiction, maybe. I'm
just fascinated by this.
Yeah, maybe. You never know. You might want to fictionalize the story too.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say that I'm really grateful to Belmont Books for tonight. I think this has been really interesting, and I've learned a lot, even beyond your wonderful books. I would urge everyone to buy them and read them, and even buy them and read them back to back, so that you can engage. This discussion will be even more meaningful. And I also want to thank Belmont Books, because they're hosting my launch November 9th.
Yay!
For the Dangers of an Ordinary. So I'll be back talking about my own book in November, and I thank you for that.
And thank you, Lynne, for taking the time to interview us.
My pleasure.
So look forward to it. And if anyone came in late for the event, we did record this, so it'll be up on our YouTube channel within 48 hours or so you can kind of catch up on any of the discussion that you missed. Thank you, Lynne, for hosting such a great conversation. And thank you both to Kathy and Alexi for joining us tonight. We hope that you will support them and buy their books, even if it's not from us. I hope you will support another independent bookstore and keep them thriving and going. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alexi. Super fun.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, congrats. And Lynne, I can't wait. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.